Please sit.
Right. We've been welcomed by the Communication Office. So good evening once more. My name is Professor George OBENG, Honorary Secretary of the Academy, and I'll be here to provide brief introductory remarks. President of the Academy, past presidents of the Academy, vice presidents of the Academy, fellows of the Academy, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, students, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of fellows of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, Ghana's premier learned society, I welcome all of us to day 2 of this 3-day event marking the 58th in the DANQUAH lecture series. As we know, the DANQUAH Memorial Lecture Series was instituted in 1968 in memory of a foundation member of the Academy, Dr. Joseph DANQUAH, who died in prison in February 1965, fighting for freedom in all its manifestations. This event consists of a series of 3 lectures delivered on varying themes that have ranged from law, philosophy, literature, medicine, health in general, religion, and nation building, among others. I'm also pleased to announce that this event is being streamed live on the Academy's social media platforms, Zoom, YouTube, and Facebook. We acknowledge the sponsors who contributed towards this event. I acknowledge Professor Samuel Jesse Obeng, FGA, Dr. Isaac Yao Jesse, North Shore Hospital, USA, Professor Emmanuel Obeng Jesse, North Carolina Agriculture and Technical State University, Professor Samelia Obeng Jesse and Dr. Rhea Moulton, Ohio State University and the James Hospital, respectively, and Barnabas Obeng Jesse, Medical School student at Indiana University School of Medicine, USA. We would like to acknowledge these sponsors by respectfully a round of applause. Thank you. I think it's also in order to acknowledge the presence of our esteemed students from Accra Academy and Accra Girls, SHS, our future. At this juncture, it is my pleasure to introduce the chairperson for this event. The chairperson for this evening's event, Emerita Professor Techua Menu, is the Vice President of the Arts Section of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences. She is a professor, Emerita Professor at the University of Ghana. She served as Director of the Social Development Policy Division of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa in 2014-2017, and Director of the Institute of African Studies, University of Ghana between 2002-2009. In August 2022, Emerita Professor Techua Menu was appointed Senior Fellow at the Ghana Center for Democratic Development, Accra, and was also appointed Honorary Professor at Nelson Mandela University, Port Elizabeth, South Africa, in May 2023. Emerita Professor Techua Menu holds undergraduate and graduate degrees in law from the University of Ghana and the University of Dar es Salaam, and a PhD degree in anthropology from Indiana University, USA. Her research, scholarly, and advocacy interests include African development, human rights, women's rights and empowerment, contemporary African migrations, and African higher education systems. Professor Techua Menu has published extensively in all these areas. Our chairperson is a fellow of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, and she was elected vice president of the arts section in December 2024. She has received several awards and recognitions, including the University of Ghana's Meritorious Service Award in the year 2007, the Order of the Volta Officer Class in 2008, honorary doctorate degree from the University of Sussex, UK 2015, and the Franco-German Prize for Human Rights and the Rule of Law 2023. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome our chairperson, distinguished Emerita Professor Techua Menu. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorary Secretary. Madam President of the Academy, past presidents of the Academy, Vice President for the Sciences, Fellows of the Academy, distinguished guests, family, friends, and colleagues of our speaker, Professor Samuel Gyasi OBENG, ladies and gentlemen, students, and all those joining us virtually. Good evening. Yesterday, we were treated to a very erudite lecture on the first lecture in the series on language and liberty in Ghanaian political and judicial discourse by our very able speaker, Professor Samuel Gyasi OBENG. And those of us who were here yesterday are all sizzling for today's encore, if you like. Yesterday we were treated to a rather conceptual lecture, but today we're going to be zooming in, and our topic is going to be on language and liberty in selected Ghanaian political practices. Yesterday we heard about political actors, which made us think that people are playing roles when they are doing politics. And today, our lecture is going to look at 4 personalities, 2 historical figures and 2 contemporary figures in the persons of Dr. J.B. DANQUAH, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, for the historical figures, and especially for our young people here, these must be truly historical figures, although for some of us in this room, we knew them. So, and then the contemporary figures are going to be President John Dramani Mahama and Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia. So we are getting really excited to move from history into the present, and for our lecturer to use the same lens that he did yesterday to examine, because they are political actors, and we're going to examine how they have used some of these ideas of language and liberty in their political discourse. But before we get to that, allow me to reintroduce our speaker, Professor Samuel J.C. OBENG, who received his BA in Linguistics from the University of Ghana and his Doctor of Philosophy from the University of York, England, specializing in language and linguistic science with emphasis on phonetics, phonology, and pragmatics, and a postdoctoral research training in linguistics at UCLA, the University of California at Los Angeles. He held a full-time academic appointment at the University of Ghana, where he was my neighbor, and also had part-time appointments at the Ghana Institute of Journalism, the Alliance Française, and the University of Cape Coast, and from 1988 till he left to go to Indiana, he was the radio teacher for GBC's Everyday English program, and also taught English language for JSS and SSS on GBC radio. Professor OBENG joined Indiana University's Linguistics department in 1994, at the time when I was also in Indiana. He was tenured and promoted to associate professor in 2000 and to full professor in the year 2006. In 2022, he was appointed a distinguished professor of linguistics by the Board of Trustees of Indiana University for his outstanding research and scholarship. And between 2007 and 2015, he directed the African Studies program at Indiana University. And currently, he directs the West African Languages Institute and the newly established Indiana University Ghana Gateway as its inaugural academic director. He has also served as Director of Graduate Studies, Undergraduate Studies, and also coordinated languages at Indiana University. A leading Africanist linguist, Professor J.C. OBENG is a pioneer researcher on phonetic resources unique to discourse participants in specific African interactional settings, and also a pioneer and leader in research on language and liberty, to wit, the expression of liberty through resistive speech in African political and judicial discourses. Professor OBENG is also a leader in onomasiology, where his work weaves together multiple languages to demonstrate the pragmatic and linguistic richness of anthroponymy and toponymy. He's a major authority on African pragmatics and discourse analysis. He has written 36 research books and edited volumes. He has co-edited 52 service publications, 130 journal research articles, book chapters, creative writing articles, 17 books and article reviews. And he currently has 14 monograph essays, 6 journal articles and book chapters, and 3 creative works in progress, enough to give anyone a headache. Professor OBENG has won several important awards and honors, including being appointed Distinguished Professor by Indiana University's Board of Trustees, a 2-time Carnegie African Diaspora Fellow through the University of Ghana Carnegie Diaspora Linkage Program, Distinguished Research Scholar at the University of Maryland, Eastern Shore, the Association of Commonwealth Universities Scholar, a McGraw-Hill's Distinguished Scholar Award, and Language Specialist Consultant for important publishers, including the Oxford University Press. He's regularly invited as a plenary or keynote speaker at conferences and as an external examiner and/or evaluator for leading universities in Africa, Asia, Europe, Oceania, the Americas, and the Greater Middle East. He has served as primary investigator for the U.S. Department of Education Title VI grants, co-investigator for Department of State grants, and hosted over 30 Fulbright scholars from Africa at Indiana University. He was also the editor-in-chief of 3 internationally refereed journals, Africa Today, Issues in Political Discourse, and Issues in Intercultural Communication. Besides being a linguist, Professor OBENG is also a poet, with 2 of his books of poems being A Nation in Crisis, published in 2020, and Voices from the Graves, Words of Wisdom and Caution from the Departed, 2008. He also writes short stories, and he writes political satire articles in newspapers under different pen names. Professor J.C. OBENG was elected a Fellow of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2023. Please join me in welcoming Professor J.C. OBENG to the podium.
Thank you very much for that beautiful introduction. I'm very grateful. President of the Academy, past presidents of the Academy, vice presidents of the Academy, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, students, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I take it as an honor to be given this privilege. It is a privilege to present this lecture series. And I can't think of anything bigger and better than the opportunity that I've been given. I'll try not to talk for too long. I think yesterday I talked for too long. I'll try not to do that today. And so let's begin. I was going to show there you go. Well, so the topic for today's lecture is Language and Liberty in Ghanaian Political Discourse. Now, let me kind of give an overview of what I'm going to be doing today. First, I would kind of recapitulate and kind of extend very briefly, if I should use that word, what I did yesterday. Go over it. And then I will kind of talk about the concept of politics. What is it? And then political discourse. Then I will kind of spend a few minutes talking about the data that I am using, and then the theoretical underpinning of the lecture. And then I will subject to empirical scrutiny the speeches of 4 political actors. And yes, I consider politics as a theater of chaos. And we have these wonderful actors who insert themselves onto the theater, onto the scene, with some causing more chaos than others. And so I'll look at it from the point of view of diachrony and synchrony. From the point of view of diachrony, I would look at speeches of J.B. DANQUAH, Kwame Nkrumah, and for synchrony, I'll look at Mahama and Bawumia. And then I'll kind of have a brief discussion and a conclusion. So, yesterday I talked about the concept of language. And what I mentioned was that language is first and foremost a cognitive experience. It is innate, it is intellected, to borrow the word of Pluto's word. It is inventive. It is actualized through speech. But then I also warn that speech isn't just a community of sounds. It is sounds plus prosodies, pitch, loudness, tempo, rhythm, voice quality, and others. And then I kind of talked about language in social interaction, the relevance of language in social interaction, with particular reference to language in institutional domains like law, religion, medicine, education, commerce, gender dynamics, gender perceptions and gender dynamic, place of abode, and service profession. Here what I was trying to show was that even the work we do, our profession, index the language we use, and language also indexes our profession, the place we live, the political party we belong to, where we went to school, and all that. And then I ended the session on language by talking about entwining, the interlacing of language and liberty. I then went on to talk about liberty. And what I said basically was that liberty, like language, is a cognitive experience. As humans, we are born free. I talked about the fact that we are Homo sapiens, wise, Homo loquiens. We are the only species that have language. And Homo grammaticus, we are grammarians. And to that I added Homo libertas. We are born free. You look at kids, for example. If they want to go to a place, they may push their parents' hand and go. Of course, you have to go and grab them back. But the concept of freedom is part of our being. I looked at liberty in terms of types, taxonomy. And I mentioned that, it is philosophical. And I based that on the theory of the British scholar, Sir Isaiah Berlin, his work 4 essays on liberty, where he talks about negative liberty and positive liberty. Negative liberty refers to freedom from intrusion by people in authority and the associated institutions. So people in authority and their associated institutions. And then positive liberty is the freedom that we want so that we can act as we will. And then I talked about social liberty, political liberty, the fact that we want to be able to, participate in elections. We want to be able to vote. We want to be able to make political decisions without any inhibition. I talked about legal liberty, economic liberty. I like that one. We want to have a job in which the wages, the salary that is paid to us, is livable. You don't want to struggle financially as humans. I talked about health liberty, liberty being a health construct, moral liberty, ethical liberty, religious liberty. And I think I like that one also. The free exercise of religion. It doesn't mean that religion is good or bad. And the state has no business initiating or establishing a religion. Our constitution doesn't allow that. We can be of any faith that we want, but the state has no business establishing a religion. Environmental liberty, again, I talked about this. We don't want our lands, to be poisoned by cyanide, by greedy people who are digging for gold. And who are the beneficiaries of liberty? All of us are. All of us are beneficiaries of liberty. And also liberty is what? It's universal. Different cultures may have different ways of enacting or performing it. But, in some cultures, silence may be what they use. In other cultures, they may talk. Liberty is also exceptional. And I ended by connecting the two. That because they are both cognitive, because they are both intellectual, because we are born with it, and they are actualized in our practical experience, they have to be, attention, and we have to pay attention to both of them at the same time. Language indexes liberty, liberty indexes language. So for today's lecture, what I'm going to try to do is to examine language and liberty in Ghanaian political sphere, from both diachronic and synchronic perspective. For diachronic, I'll be examining the language and liberty in Gold Coast political process. And in pursuing this concern, I would subject Dr. J.B. DANQUAH and President Nkrumah's speeches to empirical scrutiny with a view to unearthing or bringing out how each used resistive speech or text to challenge the validity claims of their oppressors. And I haven't put it in parentheses. From the point of view of synchrony, I will try to synthesize and analyze. Synthesize, analyze. If you look at kids, when they have they call them the Lego, they build it, and then they tear it apart. So we'll look at what brings these things together and then try to find out what is inside of it. So we'll try to synthesize and analyze the speeches of two contemporary Ghanaian political actors, President John Mahama and former President Mahamudu Bawumia, to uncover how and the extent to which language is appropriated to fight for liberty in the Ghanaian political process. I will demonstrate that the studied political actors use resistive speech and or persuasive speech to fight for liberty, either for themselves, the Gold Coast, Ghana, or their political leanings, political ideologies, political parties. I will conclude by emphasizing that it is due to the innateness of language and liberty and the political actors' worldview on liberty that push them into fighting for and or maintaining liberty. And then also the various linguistic and discursive tools used for receiving liberty do not constitute, and here's a warning, those features do not constitute a litany of tools. In other words, I'm not just listing them. They don't constitute a litany of tools. They are knitted together in a web of constellation that clash and blend in the actors' lives and socio-political experiences. So, what is politics? What is politics? Now, my definition will be different from those of a political scientist. So let me declare, I am not a political scientist. I'm not a jurist. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a linguist. Language is my profession. So, and remember yesterday I said that I don't define stuff because I don't, anytime anyone has asked me, what's the meaning of a word, I've asked them, what's the meaning of meaning? So, in talking about politics, I see it as both work. So politics is work. In Chi we would say ayajuma. Politics is work. And if it is work, we know what happens with work, don't we? Yes, you have to go do it. I mean, these days in the US, they can ask you to tell them what you did the past week, or they're going to fire you or something. So it is work. And then it's also an institution. So I'm borrowing from Freed, 2017. Now, discursive constructions found in politics are institutional and are different from those of ordinary conversational interactions. It's an institution. Now, political discourse, and I'm following after, as far as I'm concerned, I view political discourse as what? Communication and interpretation of events and ideas within the realm of politics. Communication, interpretation. I take it as axiomatic. I take it as given that for any discourse to be designated as political discourse, it ought to deal with communication and or the exchange of ideas, opinions, or points of view about politics in the general sense and government in particular. So, and political discourse encompasses, a lot of things. I've listed only a few: political speeches, campaign, campaign orations, the Constitution, the national anthem. Here is kind of interesting because I'm thinking about political debates and interviews. Political debates and interviews. And yesterday I did mention the fact that if you pay attention to political interviews, what you see is that oftentimes there are questionable questions. And questionable questions tend to be unanswerable. And so if political actors have to answer them, then they resort to obliqueness or indirectness. And then, of course, we have policy documents. I think the work of Van Dyke and Wilson stand out in terms of what political discourse is about. For any discourse to be termed political, its overall context must be political in form, content, setting, and extent. Content, that's fairly easy. Form, structure. So first context, okay, context. By context, we know what we're talking about. I'm borrowing the expression by the Polish anthropologist Bronisław Malinowski, context of situation, which includes everything. The setting, the scene, the time. As I'm speaking now, I'm paying attention to the time, the lights, everybody who is here, because I have to make sure that I'm interacting, not just with myself, but with everybody, including the building. Everything is important. If the lights go off, I'll have to increase the volume, for example. So all those are very important. And of course, the setting, that's the place, and the extent. Now, typical of political discourse are dissimulation or deceit. Studies have shown that. I'm not just saying it. Verbal acts that sometimes hide the truth. And the concept of truth is very interesting in politics. Secrecy, suppression, censorship, euphemism. We can add disphemism. Evasion, delegitimization, legitimization. And then, of course, there are unique linguistic features. The grammar is different. The pragmatics is different. The phonetics is different. So for grammar, here we're talking about manipulation of functional systems. Pronouns, for example, we can, when you hear we, okay, we can be I, it can be we Ghanaians, we NDC, we NPP, we this and that. Okay, so there's ambiguity. And the reason why there is ambiguity is that you can always say, that wasn't what I meant. I was referring to this one. So, in political discourse, manipulation is very important of the functional categories. And then, of course, there is the unique political role, for the pragmatic features. Unique role for glittering generalities. As we saw some of it yesterday, when you use words of virtue. Unique role for factives, factivity. If you hear such an expression as we all know, you'll be a fool to say, I don't know. Once the person says, as we all know, the person commits you to knowing. And you can't say, oh, but I don't know. You look very awkward, wouldn't you? So, factivity is very important there. And then, of course, the phonetics. Phonetics is very important. Loudness. Pausing. A political actor may pause for an audience to applaud. If you paid attention to the State of the Nation address, for example, the president speaks for a while, pauses, because he expects, the audience, to applaud. And sometimes when there's a difficult point to be made, you make it when they are applauding, so that they don't hear you making it. So these are wonderful, wonderful. Phonetic features and how they interlace with political discourses, extremely interesting. Now the data, I've talked about it already. I'll be looking at J.B. DANQUAH's 1952 congratulatory speech on Nkrumah's election as Gold Coast's first prime minister. Nkrumah was prime minister before he became president. And then Dr. Kwame Nkrumah's Independence Day speech delivered on March 6, 1957. President John Mahama's May 15, 2023, acceptance speech of the NDC's presidential candidacy nomination. And then Dr. Mahamadou Bawumia's acceptance speech of the NPP's presidential candidacy nomination. And the reason why I decided to choose those two was, they went back to back, and also they're kind of interesting in content and in context. And we'll see that in a minute. When you want something, someone has something, you want to take it away from them, how do you say things to delegitimize them? It's normal in politics. You're not going to say, oh, those guys have done very well, and so, but then vote for me anyway. No, you're going to have to say what they've done, which is not good, so you don't play so much into the good things they've done. You downplay the good things, and you, emphasize or amplify the things that they've done that are not so good. All right. In terms of theory, I'm framing it within my own principle, the principle of language and liberty. And basically, what I say in this principle of theory is that political actors in general, have a way of conducting liberty with language, such that language, would index liberty, and liberty would find expression in language. And there's a use of resistive speech. And today I've added persuasive also, and we'll see why I did that. There's a use of resistive speech to challenge the validity claims by the other side. These guys are saying they've done so well. These guys don't even think that they are oppressive. They think everything they are doing is fine. But then the person being oppressed, all people that are oppressed, and this is, it cuts across cultures, have a way of saying, enough is enough. We're not going to, stand for it. And what kind of language do they use? So as a linguist, I'll be talking about, the linguistic and discursive features, discursive features that are used in the enactment of, the fight for liberty. And as I said, I'll be looking at the synthesis and the analysis of it. So let's begin with the right. Let's look at J.B. DANQUAH. You know about his history, so I'm not going to reinvent the wheel. So as a linguist, I'll go straight into, his discourse. Now, on March 5th, 1952, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, leader of government business, was elected by the Gold Coast Legislative Assembly to become the first prime minister of the Gold Coast. The vote was 45 to 31. 45 for Dr. Nkrumah, 31 for Dr. DANQUAH. Now, this is very interesting, and I want you to pay attention to it because what we're going to see is what we call the number game. It's a discourse, the number game. Now, following Dr. Nkrumah's election, Dr. DANQUAH gave a speech in which he congratulated Prime Minister Nkrumah and then cautioned him about the need for him, that's Nkrumah, to follow the process and ensure due diligence in governance. DANQUAH warned of possible consequences if Nkrumah did not implement agreed upon policies. Now, this is very tiny. the, what do you call it? I wish they could make it bigger, but it's very, very, that's the entire speech. That's always the problem. I'll wait for this to come on. Just as if I knew it would go off. All right, so well, I'm going to continue. I know the students would have to leave at a particular time, and so what I'm going to do is just read bits and pieces of it, and okay. So the text was very difficult for anybody to read, and so what I've done is to extract bits and pieces from here and there to talk about it. If you look at the speech which Dr. J.B. DANQUAH gave, what you saw, I mean, the nature of it, in terms of its content, it was political as well as legal. So the speech was political and legal. And it also touched on morality and ended with a cautionary note. So it was political, it was legal, moral, and then cautionary. Now, the discourse structure of the speech was there was an opening, there was the main content, and a closing. An opening, the main body, and then a closing. So the opening, which was Mr. Speaker, was consistent with normal parliamentary, or in this case, the Constituent Assembly's modes of address. You address the chair, Mr. Speaker, and that's exactly what he did. Now, pragmatically, from the point of view of pragmatics, if someone begins a speech with Mr. Speaker, it projects that something is upcoming, which he actually delivered, if you like. Now, also, if you look at the excerpt is immediately following the address, he goes on to say something like this: may I be permitted to add my very warm congratulations to those already made by the late Minister of Agriculture and Natural Resources, and also supported by you, Mr. Speaker, on the election of the Honorable Dr. Kwame Nkrumah as Prime Minister of the Gold Coast. And that stretch of utterance contains the congratulatory message. So it is Mr. Speaker, followed by the congratulatory message. The stretch or the utterance, may I be permitted, is a discursive routine employed by members of the Assembly to seek permission to take the floor. May I be permitted to do this and that. Now, in terms of the text analysis, what we see is the use of intertextuality, the use or the employment of intertextuality. You know, it's a term developed by Barthes, and basically, you know, we can even take it further back. You know, if you look at the biblical character, Solomon, the existentialist philosopher, you know, he says nothing is new. Everything that is happening has happened before. What is being said now has been said before and will be said again. So, you know, the use of intertextuality was very pervasive here. DANQUAH makes reference to the late Minister of Agriculture and Natural Resources and the Speaker of Assembly's congratulatory message. So there's that kind of intertextual link. When somebody does that, it is for credibility. It's for credence and credibility. Look, I'm not the only person doing this. This has been done before. So if I'm doing it, I'm not doing anything new. Then there is agency. Oh, that's me. Can we have the text? All right. There we go. Yeah, okay. Can we, let me see. We have to go back. Go back, please. Go back. And back. Can I do it? Can you go back again, please? Can you go back? There you go. Okay, so let's stop there. So, and then also, as I've mentioned, the function of the use of intertextuality is for credence. And then also agency. This is very important. The expression supported by you, Mr. Speaker, gives both agency to the Speaker of the Assembly and normalizes what DANQUAH was saying. Another reference to agency is found in the excerpt. This day marks a great day in the history of the Gold Coast. It marks an epoch in the struggle started many years ago by some, many of whom are not amongst us, some of whom are still with us. Now that's very interesting here, because what DANQUAH is drawing Nkrumah's attention to is the fact that the fight for liberty was done by many, that no one person or political party could claim sole credit for it. And this statement was in reaction to the then thinking by some that Nkrumah and the CPP were either the main or the sole agents who fought for Gold Coast independence. DANQUAH is saying, that's not the case. Now, we also find intertextuality, implicature, and antithesis, you know, in the utterances that I've put here. It does not give us what we want, full self-government. It does not even improve upon GYASI or the Eden Clark Constitution, but it is a mark that we have compelled the British people to recognize that we are fit to govern ourselves. Here, DANQUAH makes a textual reference to what the Gold Coast freedom fighters had asked for: full self-government. Freedom beyond what the Castle Commission had recommended, freedom beyond what the Constitution drafted by DANQUAH at the request of Eden Clark and jointly discussed and accepted by the Constituent Assembly. By implicature, DANQUAH was arguing that what had been achieved was by no means complete and that the fight for full liberty had to continue. In talking about implicature, let me give a typical example in our own world experience here. Let's assume we know when the mailman brings the letter, okay? Or when the bell rings. And I ask you, what time is it? And you tell me, the mailman has come. Okay? If we know when the mailman comes, let's assume he comes at 2 o'clock, it means it's past 2 o'clock. You know, you find that in communication quite a bit. Then, of course, there is also the use of antithesis, you know, contrast. What is not and what is. And then the use of parallelism, parallel structures. You know, those are very interesting because if a speaker uses the same structure over and over, cognitively, it helps in processing the message. You know the structure already. And so, trying to understand it becomes very easy. It also emphasizes the limit of what has been achieved in this particular case. Now, DANQUAH engages in further structural parallelism to demonstrate his support or otherwise of whatever Nkrumah chose to do with regard to the fight for full liberty. Here he says, if he is prepared to wait, I will not wait. If he is prepared to go ahead, I will go ahead. So if we look at these two here, these are conditional sentences beginning with the subordinating conjunction, if. In normal way of speaking, in normal utterance, one would more likely have such things as, I will not wait if he's prepared to wait. I will go ahead with him if he's prepared to go ahead. Now, front shifting, or bringing to the front the clauses, if he's prepared to wait, and if he's prepared to go ahead, Discourse pragmatically, this puts a burden of agency or otherwise in the fight for self-governance on the lead agent, Nkrumah. Here's the number game. I want to say this, Mr. Speaker. This House has declared its real mind, 45 for, 31 against. This is a very important thing to note. It is for the government and the Prime Minister to note that there are people in this House who want to register a protest against mismanagement of affairs during the last 12 months. There are people in this House who feel they should not be where they are. 31 is the number. So, he mentions this number, he amplified this number to point to the fact that, you know what? There is the opposition, you have to respect the opposition. And what is interesting here is that he mentions 35 persons voted against what he calls mismanagement of the affairs during the last 12 months. DANQUAH uses the figures 45 and 31 to draw Nkrumah's attention to the fact that opposition to that's Nkrumah's policies and governance was significant. The attempts at using parliamentary majoritarianism to mismanage government business would only see the opposition to his policies grow. 31 may increase to 32, even 40, or 46. Wonderful play on, figures. And in fact, at some point he ends and you'll not be there anymore. So, by implicature, if we look at this sentence, it says, and then you may not be there again. So, 31, then it goes up a bit, then it goes up a bit, and then you lose your majority. Now, this is used to emphasize and consequently warn Nkrumah that he will be unseated if he failed to implement policies already approved by the Assembly. Although not explicitly stated, the above extract by implication, or it implicates the fact that Nkrumah may have been sticking with or to his own agenda or policies, instead of what the assembly may have passed, an act that was and is contrary to good governance. Now here's the warning, and I'm not going to read all of it. I mean, we've lost some time. Now, if we look at what DANQUAH is saying here, he warns Nkrumah against privilege. Yesterday we mentioned it, privilege. If there is, liberty, it has to be liberty for all. If there is, anything that is passed, all must have the, chance to be part of it. Else it becomes privilege. So here he talks about political, legal, and moral implications. Politically, he says, he calls for good governance. Legally, he warns Nkrumah against privilege. And morally, he warns against acts that are contrary to the moral good of society, moral good of the nation, that is. Okay, so, basically, if you look at DANQUAH's speech, what we're seeing here is the use of language, first to index the congratulations, then to warn, and in so doing, he resorts to the use of intertextuality. He refers to things that have gone on before. He resorts to implicature. In other words, he knows that, or he knew that the assembly knew what was going on, and so he didn't have to say anything, in any detail, because they could understand what was going on. He used antithetic constructions, and most importantly, he used the number game. The number game is a very important discourse feature. If you've paid attention to Donald Trump, he begins by saying hundreds, and then he goes to thousands, then he goes to millions. Okay? And these days people are even saying billions. All right. Now, next I go to Nkrumah's speech, and again, I'm not going to read it. It's too tiny for anybody to read. What I'll do is to analyze it. I will take bits and pieces from it and then analyze it. There you go. Okay. Now, if you look at it, this was the speech delivered by Nkrumah on March 6, 1957. Most of you have heard that speech a million times. So what I'm doing here is just trying to emphasize some of the things that Nkrumah says here. Now, he resorts to the use of metaphor, for example. Nkrumah conceptualized colonialism as metaphorically as what? War. And the colonized people as prisoners of war. One thing about metaphors is that, I'm sure everybody here knows it. I'm using a factive. In metaphorical, as when you say X is Y, he's a lion. Okay? Whereas if we're doing simile and other things and analogies, we use other things like as and like. Okay. So the one thing good, the theory of metaphor, especially the work by George Lakoff, who, by the way, got his PhD from Indiana, is that, metaphors help us to conceptualize the world in reality. If I say someone is a lion or someone is a hyena, which animal is very bad in our context here? In person, okay, let's assume a goat. Everybody wants to eat a goat or sheep or something. Now, if I say somebody, okay, let's say sheep, okay? If I say he's a sheep, okay, obviously, in my worldview, sheep are a little stupid, but then also, biblically, they are said to be very humble. So let's forget about the one in scripture, and let's deal with the one in society. If someone tells you, you giant, they're saying you are stupid, aren't they? Okay, so once you hear that expression, giant, sheep, okay? You know the way we think of them. And so that it makes you think of the person in terms of the characteristics of a sheep. Am I making sense here? Yeah. All right. So that's what metaphors do. So Nkrumah conceptualizes colonialism, okay, as war and the colonized people as prisoners of war, POWs. Now, gaining independence, he called it battle, okay? And winning, he calls it what? Victory. The battle has ended. At long last, the battle has ended, okay? So, by the expression, and thus Ghana, your beloved country, is free forever, Nkrumah emphasizes Ghana's independence as an attainment of liberty that is eternal and everlasting. Now, liberty intrusion of the people of the Gold Coast lasted nearly 5 centuries, from 1471 to 1957, by different people. So the expression "at long last," when you hear the expression "at long last," it presupposes that something has gone on for a long period of time. Now, here again we have metaphors here. Seeking liberty is equal to battle. Attaining liberty is equal to victory. And the method of fighting is noble. Fighting for liberty is a noble idea. It's a noble mission, so to speak. The expression, and yet again, I want to take the opportunity. This is another interesting one. And I want to take the opportunity to thank the people of this country, the youth, the farmers, the women who have so nobly fought and won the battle. Also, I want to thank the valiant, or the valiant, however I want to pronounce it, ex-servicemen who have so cooperated with me in this mighty task of freeing our country from foreign rule and imperialism. So there's a use of parallelism here. Agency. Nkrumah sees himself as the principal agent by using the first person singular I, and me also. Then for secondary agents, he mentions the youth, the farmers, the women, the ex-servicemen. There are missing agents here. There are people that he doesn't mention. He doesn't mention J.B. DANQUAH, Emmanuel Bechebe Lamte, Ebenezer Akunweje, William Oforiatta, Edward Akufo-Addo, George Alfred Grant, R.A. Awono Williams, Robert Samuel Blair, and many, many, many others. Okay? He doesn't mention them at all. Now, there's an entailment here. There's an entailment here. I mean, one could deduce from, what I just showed or what I just read, that what kind of intrusion on liberty of those people of the Gold Coast entailed. Difficulties, imprisonment, hardships, suffering, words that have the semantic sub-categorization feature of minus liberty plus pain plus emotional violence. So when you are under colonialism, you don't have liberty. You are subjected to pain of different types. And there is that kind of emotional violency. Thus, life under colonial rule, Nkrumah surmises, entails anguish, horrendousness, deprivation, and absolute misery. Gaining liberty marked what Nkrumah referred to as end of troubles. And the permanency of Ghana's liberty, Ghana is free forever. Now, there's also, again, the use of metaphor. Where Nkrumah metaphorically aligns Ghana's attainment of independence with being awake from slumber and being under colonialism, being asleep. So now we are awake from our sleep, okay, but then we were asleep. We were unable to do anything. All right, and then he talked about not being asleep anymore. Now, of course, there's also the use of antithesis. We are no longer a colonial, but free, independent people. Oppression as opposed to freedom. So, I mean, you find the use of antithesis. It's a very common phenomenon. Political actors use that quite a bit. You contrast the good and the bad. Now, Nkrumah also amplifies his conceptualization of the fight for liberty. And I think we've talked about that already. Now, boldest and most consequential statement that Nkrumah makes is his connection of Ghana's independence with African liberty, where he says, we have won the battle against again, and we have to re-educate ourselves, blah, blah, blah. Our independence is meaningless unless it is linked with the total liberation of Africa. Here, Kwame Nkrumah yokes Ghana's independence with Africa's total liberation. Liberty and African identity are couched in Afrocentricity and Africanity. Now, let's look at President John Mahama. I wish he was here. I'm not going to say anything bad about him. Anyway, I will analyze in his speech. Now, President John Mahama on May 15, 2023, accepted his acceptance speech of the NDC's presidential candidacy nomination is what I'm looking at here. Now, I don't have the speech here. It's very long, but I'm, again, taking bits and pieces from it. So the first observation that I put forward, or the first hypothesis that I put forward with regard to his speech, is that language and liberty, as it relates to press freedom, is highly pervasive in his speech. Now, let me kind of read what you call it, this one. It's very short. In the government's bid to obscure corruption, they have resorted to suppressing press freedom and inordinate clampdown on civil society activities, including even members of parliament who dare to expose corruption. The rights of citizens, including journalists, no longer matter to government. In the last 2 years, Ghana has dropped on the Press Freedom Index. So here, President Mahama, or candidate Mahama at the time, used an existential sentence. An existential sentence such as, there is God. You're making a declarative. So there's a use of an existential sentence to directly and explicitly state the existence of suppression of press freedom, come down of civil society, disregard of the rights of citizens, and Ghana's drop in PFI. When someone makes that statement, it's like, okay, this is what it is. It's difficult to challenge them, isn't it? Unless you actually have the facts. So in political discourse, existential sentences may give the appearance of evidentiality. It appears to say, you know what, this is evidentiary. Remember yesterday I mentioned the fact that in political discourse, even hearsay could be evidentiary. So now the phrase inordinate, clamp down, and cause suppression or intrusion, that is neither warranted, rational, or permissible. And there is the implicator here also. The implication was the same basically, is that if government saw itself as not being corrupt, then it would not have resorted to acts bordering on illegality as corruption and denial of liberty, oppression. So the rights of citizens, including journalists, no longer matter to government. Again, it's like he knows what he's saying and he says it. Now, there's the use of intertextuality as usual. Reference to Ghana's plummeting in the Press Freedom Index. Again, this is intertextual and it's evidential. Now, I'm not saying it is true. I have to mention that fact. Okay, I'm not saying any of this is true. What I'm saying is that this is how it is said, and it is said for this purpose. All right. Now, on moral liberty, what I observed is that President Mahama saw the NPP administration as having broken the moral liberty, that's the value systems and value judgments associated with its office. Here's an example. Corruption and the raid, the corruption and the raid on public purse have come to a crescendo, like you're doing music. Crescendo, the crescendo. The president no longer makes corruption a pet topic in his speeches because corruption has defeated him hands down. Yet, they've been unrelenting in hiding the truth. Now, when you hear this, okay, when you hear such a sentence, and remember, the NPP had it, okay? They were in charge. This guy wants to take it away from them. You don't take it away by singing praises. So he's doing what anyone in opposition who wants to be president is doing. In terms of political discourse, we cannot fault him on that. So, if you look at the metaphor raid on public purse, the verb raid metaphorically encode what? Plundering, burglarizing. These guys are stealing. Doesn't mean it is true, but that's how he characterizes it. Crescendo, metaphorically suggests or implies having reached the apex or the highest point of criminality. There is also presupposition. Corruption has defeated him, hands down. Here, the presupposition is realized as a metaphor, helplessness, in the face of an act. It suggests the president may not have been a corrupt person, but the forces of the perpetrators of corruption may have been more powerful than him, hence his defeat in the fight. And then, of course, there's intentionality here. Yet, they have been unrelenting in hiding the truth. A government that intentionally hides the truth from its citizens intrudes their moral liberty and their right to know the truth. Again, I'm not saying that was what was happening. This is how he's putting it. And he's doing very well. Even if he was lying, he's doing very well lying. That's political discourse. The word unrelenting entails implacability, an intentional, uncompromising edge to defraud the public and starve it of the truth. All right, so before I come to this, let me kind of sum up what President Mahama did here. Basically, I've said it a million times, he is speaking to an audience that he wants, to believe in him. He wants the audience to believe in what he's saying. And for that to happen, he engages or he uses language, that delegitimizes the incumbent. Delegitimization is very important in political communication. If you want to, do well, delegitimize whoever you are competing against, and it helps. And then, of course, he's able to do what he wants to do. He won. All right, so let's look at I'm going to kind of skip some of these. Let's look at Muhammadu Bawumia. There you go. So Dr. Muhammadu Bawumia, we're looking at his acceptance speech at the NPP's presidential candidacy nomination. So here, what he does is a couple of things. Again, I don't have the speech here. He recognizes the negative liberty of the people. That's the right. He talks about the youth demonstrating. He acknowledges it by saying, telling them they have the right to demonstrate. It's rare in politics, I have to say, for someone in authority to tell people, oh, you have the right to demonstrate if you're not happy. Thank you. Oh, you saw that I was sweating. Thank you. I don't know how to keep quiet. Okay. Now, so here is, and then also he talks about their positive liberty, the right to free speech. He tells them, no, you can say things that may not be, all nice, but yes, say it. So this is what Dr. Bawumia says. While on the campaign, I became aware of a 3-day demonstration staged by the young people of our country. They had a simple message for the political class. They need more opportunities for work, they need improved living conditions, and they wanted improved public services. These are legitimate demands, and we cannot ignore them. Wow. So there's a politician who can acknowledge that. For me, that's a plus. That's a sort of political discourse analysis. But if someone will, be honest and say, you know what, since I heard them saying it, and I think they are right, I'll give him credit for it. Now, by amplifying the demand of the protesting youth and noting that the political class must pay attention to it and address it, Dr. Baumia demonstrates his recognition of the liberty of the protesters. Also, by referring to the protesters' demand as legitimate, he further validates his understanding of and preparedness to protect and maintain such liberties. He talks about their financial liberty. Remember, we talked about financial liberty yesterday. But the expression, they needed more opportunities for work, they needed improved living conditions, and they wanted improved public services. Here he calls for the creation of financial liberty for the youth. Agency is also very important. He uses the first person pronoun I. Normally in political discourse, if the political actor doesn't want to take responsibility, they will use passive sentences. Instead of saying, we lost the election was lost. And so here because you said the election was lost. Anyhow, so here he says, I want to lead a nation that improves and unleashes the talents of our youth and offers good jobs with good pay and sustainable growth with macroeconomic discipline. I, so the use of the pronoun I is very important. The verb improves denotes advancement. Something that he believes, will help the physical liberty of the young people. And then again, he used another verb, unleashes, which metaphorically encodes how and the extent to which the youth will be encouraged to run with their talents, with their dreams, for their own benefit and for the benefit of society. Education liberty. He conceives of a connection between liberty and education when he says, I'm encouraged by the literate Ghanaian society we are creating. So educational liberty, what he does is that he lists all the programs that the NPP government had done. He talks about free access, expanded support. These are positive self-representation. You have positive self-representation and negative other representation. Say the good things about yourself, say the bad things about the other. And that's very important. And then, of course, there's the use of self-praise, which is done through glittering generalities, words of value. So the adjectives free and expanded are glowing, and they denote positivity and nobility of ideas of access to and significant government support for the youth education. The youth education will be done in a second. And then, of course, there is a mention of moral liberty. Oops, I'm sorry. Moral liberty. Here, Baumia talks about the liberty as a moral value. He talks about integrity, honesty, discipline, hard work, and inclusivity. Those are very important. Now, of discourse pragmatic import is the fact that the above listed values entail moral uprightness and greatness of action. So, looking at all these four political actors, what we find is that the fight, we want to right it. We want to make it right. And up here, the philosophical, educational, physical, moral, that Guinean political actors employed communicative strategies that resisted perceived or real intrusion on their liberty and well-being. They negatively presented the dominant actors' actions as acts of enslavement, in case of Nkrumah, suppression, wanton disregard for human life and human dignity. You find this, especially in Nkrumah, DANQUAH, and Mahama. Working within the theory of language and to help to unearth language's role in the fight for liberty by political actors in different political domains and also in different time frames. It also showed how language indexed and was indexed by liberty within the Ghanaian political practice. Now, what we learn here is that, language use in the fight for liberty brought to light imperfections and failures in Ghanaian politics. From what these guys were saying, we can tell that there were problems in Ghanaian society. Most importantly, the language used to talk about and seek liberty created an environment anticipated to strengthen democracy and the constitutional order, and a political space for a call to restructure the power dynamics of Ghanaian society. These guys are not doing very well. Let's vote them out. Let's bring us in. Or the colonialists, let's get them out. Or Nkrumah, stop bribery and corruption. Liberty was viewed as unalienable right. Liberty is a relevant and significant aspect of nation building. Any nation that ignores liberty is doomed to fail. The study discourse points to the fact that theoretical explanation of liberty in Ghanaian polity must be grounded in our socio-political experience. This also points to the fact that liberty must not be seen as marginal or temporary feature of our polity. The studied political actors were seen as power in themselves. Language and liberty are empowering, and we must ensure that this empowerment does not deteriorate or weaken. Remaining silent is not an option. If we remain silent, we're getting into dictatorship. George Washington once noted, if freedom of speech is taken away, then dumb and silent we may be led like sheep to the slaughter. Communicating liberty to Ghana's future guardians, young people here, ensures knowledge about it, the need to pursue it, and the need not to deny it to others. Indeed, our liberty must create an atmosphere where people in power freely leave or walk away from it. When the time calls for such action, you lose, you're out. In Ghana, we've been very fortunate. It's not so in other places. To quote Isaiah Berlin, once again, freedom for the pike is death to the minnows. The liberty of some ought to depend on the restraint of others. Thank you.
So can we give another round of applause to our speaker? Thank you very much, Professor OBENG. So once again, we have been treated to an exciting and erudite lecture where the speaker uses data. He presents us with data. And for some of us, most of us here who live here, some of the data that he used was very contemporary. We heard it. And I wanted to say, Professor OBENG, you were lamenting about the absence of some of the key actors. We do invite them to all our lectures, many of them. Not specifically the president, but the decision makers and the policy makers. And as I listened to you, I was thinking that if they knew that a lot of their speeches and actions form the raw material for our analysis and lectures, perhaps they might come and listen more. Perhaps when they make those utterances, they would, I'm sure they'll be very surprised that a whole lecture has been dedicated to an acceptance speech, that you have used to analyze those selected speeches for us, starting with Dr. DANQUAH's acceptance speech. As I listened, I was wondering whether there is a language for those who are victorious or sense victory, and those who are on the defensive, and how they garner the resources to even make the speeches. So as you told us, 45-31. 45-31, is that decisive? For those who have won, they say even if we won by 1, it is significant. Okay. But then as you showed us, Dr. DANQUAH reminds us, 35 can become 36, 40, or even 46. And then you will find yourself out of power, and we will be in power. So the strategies that are used to almost encourage, it's like we are down, but we are not out. And we know that if we play it right, we will win. Okay. It was fascinating, the kind of language. I think we've, like you said, and 6th March is just around the corner. First of all, 28th February is a few days coming. And if you have seen the rollout of this year's independence celebrations, it begins with the 28th February. So the recall to history to tell us that we stand on a certain cups. And it's interesting, the personalities that you chose, because they have dominated the political traditions in Ghana since our independence. And so it's really fitting that we begin to look at this. It is also a study in history for all of us. But then you come to Nkrumah, and we have listened to the March 6th. If you go to the Kwame Nkrumah Memorial Garden, the reel, it plays this. And I don't know how carefully we listen to it and the different metaphors that our speaker has helped us to pay attention to. The battle is ended. Our beloved country is free forever, you know. And the silencing, yesterday when I listened to you, I thought you hadn't said enough about silencing. But today, you have shown how in those strategies, who is included, who is excluded. Yes, yesterday you did talk about gender and the ways in which women's voices are marginalized, youth voices, but also the strategies that are used either to include or to exclude. So even in this one, whilst the youth, the women, the farmers were being saluted, the renegades, our enemies, we will not mention them, you know, but they were not part of our struggle for independence. And the metaphors of sleep and being awake, you know. We were silent, we were subjugated, now we are strong, our eyes are wide open, and as Nkrumah said, the new African in the world. So it's not just about Pan-Africanism, but this evocation of a new dawn for all of Africa. I found the Mahama and the Bawumia speeches really interesting, because you did mention that Dr. Bawumia was being courageous, was acknowledging something. But if you have seen the protests, you cannot ignore that they are not going on. And you have to be a statesperson. You have to acknowledge that it is actually because of your good policies that even people can protest. Okay, so it's really interesting when you are being put on the defensive. The other person is telling you, and I found it significant. Even the date, May 15th, for the NDC, May 15th means something. So this is the day that the acceptance speech is made, and again, it indexes very clear things. The freedom of the press index, you know, which has been dropping for some time. How you tie it indirectly to particular policies of government becomes interesting, but you know, so you are also including. That's why it now becomes important, because part of the phrasing of the President Mahama's speech was about this kind of clique who are raiding the common purse, who are excluding everybody. So of a necessity, the contending party must also show that their doors are wide open, and in fact, they will even deepen things if you give them a chance. So I think that the issues that you raise, the kind of, you go into history, but you come back to the present, and it allows all of us also, it shows that we do need, you say at the end, that communicating liberty must be about knowledge, about, the need, there must be the communication, there must be the knowledge, the acceptance that this is something that has to be fought for. But what it does is that it implies that those of us who are listening, I mean, the term, you went to a rally, they spoke, but what exactly did they say? And often, people are impressed by the sounds, but if you're trying to get some coherence of what exactly was said, it may not be very easy. Maybe you heard a phrase that appealed to you, but this kind of study that actually looks at the actual language, the structure, the words, the play, the things that are emphasized, so plunder, raid, our common resources, all of those kinds of things. It really gives you, or it creates the impression of a marauding, an insensitive government, and clearly in this case, in addition to other factors, it may have achieved the other purposes. In Dr. DANQUAH's case, because he ended up in prison, and I'm sure tomorrow we'll hear more about it, we do not see the denouement that may have arisen. So he's saying that if you don't do this, you will lose, and then we will win. And in the end, he does not win, at least not in his time. And it has to be another 50 years or so before the conclusions or the vision that he wanted, maybe not 50 years, but much later, beyond his lifetime, that this comes. So I also was intrigued by this theater of chaos and how politicians might react to it, that when they are doing things, because they speak in the name of order and discipline and rational things, and yet for us, it may look very different, I think that maybe what it will do for us henceforth is that when we read a speech, we will be attentive to the selection, because, politicians don't usually even write their own speeches. If you're a political actor, you have speech writers. But there is a certain effect that is sought to be created. And so the setting, the context, all of those kinds of things, depending on how skillful, and also the delivery, because something nice could be written for you, but depending on how you deliver it, it could be completely lost on the audience, and it would only be researchers such as you who would then use the text to analyze it. But I think that you will agree that once again, we have been treated to a scholarly exposition, and the ways in which Professor OBENG started off, he took the time to summarize what he had said yesterday and joined what he was doing, so that the framing for the talk today was still about the use of language in pursuit of liberty. And as he says, sometimes it is used in a language is used in a resistive way, and then sometimes also in a persuasive way. So when Nkrumah is speaking, you don't, at least in the speech that you selected, we don't see the persuasion. This is a language of power, of the dominant, the victorious person. But when you are on the, when you are in the ring and you are on the ropes, you may need to use more of the powers of persuasion and use these kinds of metaphors of inclusion and reason and, acceptance more than when somebody is on the warpath and feels that, they are ascendant. What they are saying is likely to tap into those things. So even then, in the Mahama speech, there is some persuasion, but there is already this smelling that, power is within sight, and we can really, as it were, pump up, all the feelings of neglect, non-inclusion, resentment, you have been clamped down, etc. I don't know that we would call that resistance as such, but it's also not persuasion. So let us give our speaker another round and come back again tomorrow to hear the final installment, which will focus on Dr. J.B. DANQUAH some more once again. Thank you very much.
Our chair has spoken all too soon. They come back tomorrow to hear more about Dr. J.B. DANQUAH. Let's give our chairperson a round of applause for doing justice to what was an interesting lecture. At this juncture, we are saying that thank you very much, Accra Academy. Thank you very much, Accra Girls. We are thrilled that you managed to make it to this lecture. Your future, the young generation, and all too soon, we've come to the end of day 2 of the 58th J.B. DANQUAH Memorial Lecture Series. To announce that there will be refreshment in the foyer, and for fellows in the fellows lounge, and for students, given the time, you have your refreshment packaged so that you can go back to your schools, and wish you a good evening. I would kindly request that we respectfully stand up as the speaker and chair leave the podium. Thank you.